We're going to pick up with Rome today. And the last lecture went just into the Roman Empire. I'm not sure why I did just about 5 minutes into that and stopped, and then picked up with all the rest of the emperors after us. But Rome today. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we can talk about Rome. Lord, we ask that you'd help us as we continue looking here at world history, and as we get into American history shortly, that we'd understand that. And Lord, appreciate at least our country as it was founded and the freedoms we have, Lord, even still today. Freedoms that we take for granted. Help us to exercise them fully. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, let's talk about Rome. This again is part of a quick run through of world history as before we get to American history. We'll get there quickly. For your notes, if you want some of the structure there for those of you with computers that want to get the outline in. We'll talk about ancient Rome for those of you old-fashioned people with pen and paper, but you do have a pen. I mean, if you're going to go full old-fashioned, you should have a pencil, all right, or maybe an inkwell. So, all right, ancient Rome. Then we'll talk about the Punic Wars, and then we'll talk about I just have by 100 Rome controlled everything around the Mediterranean, and then the Civil Wars, and then we'll get to the Roman Empire. So that'll be our main points. If you lost all that, first thing is ancient Rome. We'll talk about the oldest time frame of Roman history. And we'll pick this up in 509. That's the first date. In 509, we have actually the Roman Republic starting. Prior to 509, they had a monarch. There was a Roman monarchy. 509, they switched to a republic. And when you hear about this Roman Republic, don't think necessarily just all the Roman Empire and Caesar and all of those types of things. By that point, the republic really isn't there. It's a dictatorship essentially underneath an emperor. At this time, it's a true republic, true functioning republic. So let me give you just a little glimpse into how the structure worked that they set up here in 509. Just a few things. The head of this structure were two elected officials called consuls, C-O-N-S-U-L, consuls. They were elected for 1-year terms. So every year there was an election to pick these two consuls. Now at this point, Rome is a city and the surrounding areas. So don't think here of these gigantic national elections. It's just a local power. But consuls elected for 1-year terms. If you're familiar with world history or just kind of government in general or leadership in general, it can be very cumbersome when you have two heads for something, right? Especially in a time of crisis, if the two consuls want to approach an invading army two different ways. So they did have a mechanism to address that. The two consuls could choose a dictator that had basically complete rule for 6 months to get rid of that two-headed monster thing. So they did have this option of a dictator that survives. We're going to talk about the Punic Wars. It comes up in the Punic Wars, that idea of choosing one unified ruler for a time of crisis, so you didn't have this schizophrenic approach to things. There was a time later where they didn't do this, and the two consuls took turns on opposite days controlling the army. One guy ruled it one day, the next guy ruled it the next day. And it led to a gigantic disaster because the one leader wanted to be the guy that was in charge of the army the day that they beat Hannibal. Okay. So he pushed them before they were ready to this battle and got completely massacred in it. All right, so it didn't go so well there. So they had this dictatorship option. All right, so we had the consuls. They also had an assembly of 300 members. This was an advisory body to these consuls. And that represented the common people. And the plebeians was the term for it at that point. And then the third piece was a senate. This was composed of 100 members. And it was the aristocrats, the patricians, as they were called at this point, the Senate. So we had the consuls, the assembly, which is representatives of the common people, and the Senate, which was representatives of the patricians. And 100 members of the Senate. Is this why we have 100 members in our Senate? We pattern a whole lot after Rome and their structure. Allison's saying no. I mean, we have 100 today and they have 100. Is this just wild chance? Basically. All right. The Constitution says 2 per state. And at that point, there weren't 50 states. They weren't patterned this, but it does work out that way. All right, so 509, we have them forming this republic, and we have the beginning of the Roman Republic at that point. The second thing to talk about is that from that point, for about 300 years, 200 years, 250 or so, for quite a while, we see slowly the plebeians, the common people, getting more privileges and rights, and their political position improving over the next couple hundred years. And I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but I'd like to give you a couple of the kind of high water marks where certain rights and privileges are granted to the common people. Before I do that, at the heart of this was the common people were the soldiers that the patricians wanted to order around, and that bargaining tool there, the common people saying we're not going to go fight unless compensate us with something. So there was that struggle there that eventually gives these common people some more rights. Here's just a quick rundown of some of these things. All right, 494, if you want a year. So 509, we have the Republic. 494, we have the creation of a new office called the Tribune. Anybody heard of a newspaper referred to as the Tribune? Okay, it harkens back to this. Right? These tribunes, there were 2 of them. They were chosen just by the common class, just by the plebeians. And the most significant thing about them was that they could veto some action of the consuls. They could not propose legislation or do a whole lot of things. But if the consuls did something that they thought was somehow unfair or wrong, they could veto that. Much like the president can veto legislation from Congress, he can't particularly himself propose and start legislation along the process in the House or the Senate. But at the end, he can veto it. So they had that veto power. That was the tribunes in 494. The next step is in 450 that we'll look at. The laws of Rome were written on bronze tablets, referred to generally as the 12 tables, just 12 bronze hunks of metal that they carved the laws of Rome into. And these were displayed in the Forum. Anybody know why that would be a significant change? Was it just this magnificent work of art that everybody came and looked at, and even the common people, all of a sudden they were uplifted and their lives were better because of this work of art?
The patricians could no longer just say, well, that was a rule, and the plebeians didn't know that it wasn't a rule.
Yeah, everybody knew what the rules were. All right, the patricians couldn't arbitrarily change things. Right? The plebeians knew what the laws were. Everybody knew what the rules were. You might think this happens, but it's not intentional. If you live in the dorm, that Mr. Schrock just arbitrarily punishes you for things that he just thought of the night before. What? I didn't know that. He says, well, it's in the handbook. And he said, I never got a handbook. You didn't get it. They're written down. Everybody knew what they were. And again, a lot of these things, you have to really think, what would you do if you really wanted to torture and ruin somebody's life and you weren't a Christian? I mean, you just really wanted to mess with them and you were in charge. You just make up these new rules and then punish them for them and they didn't know about them. And there's a reason why this was a big step. It took that away. Everybody knew what the laws were. So these 12 tables were put together in 450. And they were displayed in a public place. That is the Forum in Rome, where that is. But think of like the town square, but that's really not quite the right thing. It was the center of everything. The temples were there, the market was there, the government structures were all there. It was kind of the center hub of the whole town. So when armies conquered places, they would parade through town with all of their spoils before they took them home and were fabulously wealthy. They would parade through town with them and often display them in the Forum for everybody to come and see. This was a very, very public place, and these tables were displayed there. So nobody had an excuse. So 450, that was done. The next step is marriage was legalized between the two, between the patricians and the plebeians. Guys still getting married at this point. Between the lower classes and upper classes, they can intermarry. They made the foolish mistake of thinking that you would like people that were part of your family. Oh, come on. I'm kidding. All right. And then the last step we'll look at, this one is in 287, so we're jumping ahead a little bit. There was a new body formed. It's called the Council of the Plebeians. Council of the Plebeians. It was a legislative body, and really that's at the heart of this, a legislative body. They played a role in legislation. The assembly before, it could advise the councils, and we say this is what we think you should do about this enemy approaching us, or that type of thing. This body played an actual part in making the laws. Much like we have a House and the Senate today, and both play a role. This body did the same thing. So it's 287. We have this Council of the Plebeians created, where the lower classes, or the lower classes. That sounds bad because that's most of us. Anybody here from just a super rich family? You visit Donald Trump when you go to New York. And none of us like us, so we're talking about us. So the common people here having a legitimate role in the legislative process. All right, one last thing here about ancient Rome to talk about before we go to the Punic Wars is the fact that the Roman family structure was very strong, and it really was at the heart of the Rome being a strong civilization. Very strong family structure. We're going to see that destroyed, and that really is at the heart of Rome collapsing, that family structure falling apart. There are other trappings around the perimeters, but that's kind of the rotten core of the apple here as this Roman family is destroyed. But at this point, very strong family. The father is the head of the family, very strong families. And it contributed here to a very strong, at this point, city essentially, but very quickly we're going to see them expand to that right there. Okay, ancient Rome, the Roman Republic, starts in 509. That basic structure exists all the way up to, it'd be 30 BC when we make the switch to an empire. At that point, we still have the Senate and these other offices, but they're just window dressing. They kind of like the Queen of England. There's still a queen, there's still officially a monarchy of some sort or whatever. But she plays no power. This is kind of the opposite. There's still the legislative bodies there, but they really didn't do anything. The emperor had sucked all the power to himself. But the structure exists here from 509 up until that point. So just shy of 500 years, we see this Roman Republic. So, all right, a couple of things happen in between there. All right, so first part there is ancient Rome. The next thing is the Punic Wars. Does anybody know anything about the Punic Wars? Let me rephrase that. Is anybody willing to tell us what you know about the Punic Wars? I'll be very disappointed, especially since some of you graduated from our high school, if you don't know anything about the Punic Wars. There were 3 of them. Very good. All right. Jimmy looks like he's embarrassed. Like, what are you talking about? Punic Wars? What are they? Okay, you've been out for... All right. There are 3 of them. That's a good start. Okay, and who was in that one? Sorry? Who was in that one? Which, do you remember the leader for the other city that was in charge?
It's the wars between Carthage and Rome. So Hannibal was...
Okay, he's saying Carthage and Rome, and it was Hannibal. The same Hannibal when you had the two consuls vying for power, the army, and they got smashed. Right? That same Hannibal. That was the second Punic War. So, all right, 3 of them. Let me give you the first thing I have is just a little bit of introduction, just 2 general statements about these things, and then we'll go through them. For our purposes in here, all the fine details of what happens is not so much our goal. Although there are some interesting things, and you should read those on your own. All right, some other time. But we're not going to dive into all those details. We will talk about them briefly. But I want to give you kind of 2 main things that happen here. The first is just what the wars are. It's a series of wars between Carthage and Rome. When you think Punic Wars, Carthage and Rome at war. That's what should come to mind. The word Punic Wars comes from the Latin word for Carthage. All right, so Carthage and Rome. We have these wars and the Peloponnesian War and the Civil Wars. And it's always fun on a test to see, Philip of Macedon confronting Hannibal in the Third Civil War or something. Oh, those are three separate wars. So there's always some interesting combinations here. So Punic Wars, at least if you're going to just make wild guesses, get Carthage and Rome involved, right, in that. So, all right, the second thing about just kind of general comment about the Punic Wars is that over these wars, we see Rome going from a small local power to a major Mediterranean power. Right, they start off just another one of the cities controlling themselves in the local area of Rome, or of Italy there. And they leave as one of the dominant players in the entire Mediterranean. Right, they haven't dominated it yet, but especially this whole Western Mediterranean basically is under their control. They start with just Rome, and this area around Rome, essentially they're already conquered some of the surrounding people there. But they start as a local power and end as a major world power, or Mediterranean power in this case. Okay, so you should think Carthage against Rome, and we see this transition from a local power to a major world power. They come out of this much more of what we typically think of as Rome, as this dominant superpower in the world. All right, let's quickly here talk about the three wars a little bit. We have to do a little bit of that just to confuse you for those essays that might come up at some point. All right, the First Punic War. First Punic War. At the start of this war, we have Carthage as the dominant power in the Mediterranean. Their navies, they sailed all over the place. They were the dominant power. They're one of the ancient Phoenician trading cities, and the Phoenicians went all over the place, and they kind of take up that mantle, and they trade all over. So they're the dominant power. And Rome and Carthage end up going to war here. Rome, at the start of this thing, has a very small navy at best. There's some legends you have to weed out, so we don't know exactly some of this, but at least one of the stories is that Rome, while they were building their navy, made some fake ships basically with oars and things on land so they could teach their soldiers how to row. You can think of, 20 or 30 oars on one side of a ship that are about 15 or 20 feet long, trying to keep them all together and not smack each other. Right. That training process, supposedly they did all that training on land while the ships were getting built, and then once the ships were built, they were able to hit the water running, right? Or paddling, whatever the phrase should be. So, at the very least here, Rome was not a major naval power at the beginning of this thing. All right, the major battle in this one is in 241 BC, off the coast of Sicily. How do you remember which of the islands is Sicily, other than it says it right on it? It's the one getting kicked, right? All right, the one getting kicked by Italy, Sicily. Off the coast of Sicily is the major battle in this one. Carthage loses this one. And out of this, we have a couple of things that take place. First of all, Rome gets control of Sicily and also Corsica and Sardinia. These islands here in Sicily, so all of these become Roman territories. And also, Sicily begins making yearly grain payments to Rome, a tribute payment to Rome. That is going to, that type of payment in time does great damage. It basically allows Rome to set up a gigantic welfare system, because they have all this grain coming into them from all over the country. They just distribute it to the masses of people. That welfare system does just what ours is doing. All right, it undermines that core of the family structure. But at this point, there's not enough coming in to really do that. Okay, First Punic War. Second Punic War. This is the more famous one. This one starts in 219. All of these, Rome wasn't drawn kicking and screaming into the fight. They were, in a real way, looking for the excuse. like you might do with your brother or something when he pesters you. I'm thinking of Levi and his little brother. You know, it's not, you don't go into the room hoping you don't get in a fight. You go in the room looking for the thing by which you can justify throwing him through the window. You know? That's kind of Rome's mentality as we approach these things. They were looking for the excuse to fight. All right, this starts in 219. The thing that got it started was Hannibal, the famous General Hannibal, attacking a city in Spain that was a Roman ally. Spain, there were both Carthage allied cities and colonies there, and also Spain allied cities and colonies. So anyway, there's this attack there by Hannibal on this other city. Again, if you really get into the details, you know, Rome was, you know, it's like going to your neighbor's dog and laying some raw meat on the sidewalk, and when he comes to eat it, then you yell at your neighbor because their dog ate your food, you know, that type of thing. It wasn't just that. Anyway, Hannibal attacks. We'll just leave it there. Hannibal was a true genius, military genius. He was extremely good at this stuff. By this point, he had been away from Carthage for a long time, leading their armies, and he's gone still for a long time yet. Extremely talented general. So, all right, 219 is when we see this thing get started. After the attack on the city in Spain, Hannibal then takes his army into Italy proper, and he goes through Europe and across the Alps to get in there. And this is his famous cross into the Alps. I guess you could say he crossed with his elephants. I don't know. One of them made it across. So they started with elephants, and one made it down into Italy. Not a small task to get across there. He lost a lot of men, lost a lot of equipment, still lands in Italy, and is able to take on Rome and all the might that they could throw against him. So he crosses into Italy, begins working his way south through Italy towards Rome. Rome gathers their armies, chooses a dictator, prepares for it. Eventually, the battle takes place in 216, the Battle of Cannae, Canae. This is, by the time we get to the battle, this is where we have the two consuls trading off here. And the entire Roman army is almost completely wiped out. This is a complete disaster for Rome. They had about twice as many men as Hannibal had, but Hannibal just manhandles them there. Okay, so 216 we have the Battle of Cannae. Then Hannibal proceeds to march further south, and we get a kind of a weird stalemate here for a long time, where Rome isn't really able to conquer Hannibal out in the field. I mean, they could send armies out, but he's such a good general that he can handle that. But Hannibal really doesn't have the resources to launch a siege and attack on Rome. So there's this kind of a stalemate, and Hannibal wanders around, attacks different cities. I mean, ends up at some points south of Rome, down here around near where Pompeii is, you know, attacking cities, and Rome sends people out to attack him, and he fends those off. So we have this long time frame where Hannibal's wandering around Rome, killing people, and Rome is really unable to address it, and Hannibal's not able to take Rome. All right, that goes on for a while, and finally, the battle takes place in 202 that ends this. But prior to that, what Rome did was send an army down to attack Carthage. They finally gave up this idea of directly attacking Hannibal because they had tried and it wasn't working. So they sent an army down to Carthage, hoping that this would draw Hannibal out of Italy to defend his hometown. Right? And it did. He's dragged out of Italy, and it's easy to say he went down to Carthage to defend it, but he's in Italy, has to cross the Mediterranean on water, and now Rome is the dominant Mediterranean sea power. So it's not just a let's get in a boat and sail across. This was a serious military endeavor to get down there. Makes it down there, and the battle takes place in 202. It's the Battle of Zama. So if you're following dates here, it was 216 they made the Battle of Cannae. 14 years later, the Battle of Zama. And here Hannibal loses, all right, finally defeated. Hannibal flees for his life. Eventually the Romans catch up with him, and he dies by poison the Romans, they were going to kill him. I mean, they weren't going to let this guy live. And as they surrounded his house, finally they caught up with him. He took some poison and died. So it's 202 that we see finally Hannibal and the Carthaginians being defeated in the second war. There's a couple of results of this one, the treaty and the terms of this thing that come out of it. Let me run down through those quickly. The agreement here between Carthage and Rome. The city of Carthage itself was not captured or destroyed yet. That happens in the third one. At this point, they defeat the army, and Carthage comes to some terms with them. Three main things in the agreements. First of all, Carthage lost its navy. Right. Not too far before this, Carthage was the dominant naval power. They lose the First Punic War. Rome is at least a major player, and now Carthage agrees to give it up completely. All right, so Carthage is off, at least the military vessels, off the ocean. All right, the second thing is Carthage also had to give up Spain. It was the cities in Spain where this whole thing started. So Spain becomes, all of Spain now becomes a Roman territory. And then the third thing is that Carthage had to pay annual tribute to Rome. And now we're talking about a much larger city, much larger amounts of grain coming in. All right, the last thing with the Second Punic War is I just want to mention that this Second Punic War really contributed a lot to the long-term decline of Rome. You might look at this and say, the victory and the spoils, and there is some of that, but there's the stage was set here for some things that do great damage down the road. And I've kind of already hinted at them a little bit, but let me describe what happened. This war lasted for so long. I mean, we have 219, the attack taking place in Spain. 216, Hannibal's in Italy, wandering around. It's not till 202 that the end is finished up there down in Africa. Lasts for a long time, so we see a lot of the soldiers, the common people, being drug away from their families and their farms for a decade or more. I mean, long-term absences from their farms and their property. The ones that survive finally get back home, and they're trying to, you can imagine the repairs and, trying to get the soil retilled and all of that. While they're going through that hard labor trying to get things reestablished, we have all this grain coming in from Carthage that Rome begins to give away to people. All right, and it's hard, if you know much about business, it's hard to make much money when people can get your product for free from somebody else, right? So a lot of these farmers end up losing their land, and we see this long-term shift of them drifting into the cities where they can be given this free grain that for the next 100+ years, different places that Rome conquers is giving to them. So we see kind of a long-term problem beginning to develop here at the end of the Second Punic War. I mentioned before the heart of Rome's strength was the family. And here we can see that directly attacks that. I mean, just think of a welfare system like ours today, and it has the same effect as here at this point. All right, Second Punic War. Questions there? There's all kinds of good things to read about. Just recently listened to a biography of Hannibal. Over Christmas. All right. You should do all that kind of stuff. The problem with history is basically everything you talk about, there's something interesting that you could read. So you have to read through it. All right, Third Punic War. Same thing with lecturing on this stuff, because there's all kinds of good battles we could talk about, and good backstories, and you'll have to research those on your own and discover them yourself. And you're smiling like this man is completely insane, and you're thinking, at least based on your face, that sounds pretty good. Do you think I'm insane? Do you think I'm insane? Well, you could be honest. All right, Third Punic War. Third Punic War. All right, the previous one ended in 202. This one starts in 150, so about 50 years later. This one starts in Africa when Carthage attacked Numidia, which is, it's on our map here, it's to the east of Carthage. Numidia by this point was an ally at least of Rome. So we have Carthage attacking another Roman ally, and again, you get that, the excuse was there. So Rome goes after Carthage. And this one's maybe more bloody in that sense, but very simple. Right? Rome goes to Africa and lays siege to Carthage for 3 years, starve the city out. Many of the inhabitants starve to death. The rest are sold into slavery. 3 years. I mean, they did. When they get done, there is no Carthage. I mean, it's gone. They tear the city down. They sow salt in the fields. There is no Carthage. So that final end is in 146 when they take the city of Carthage. If you ever get to go on some world travels, it's a neat place to visit. You can still see the harbor. There's some graveyards. Graveyards where they buried the children that they offered in sacrifice. The story now is, well, it's just all the infants that died. That's where they buried them. But it was they offered children in sacrifices to their gods. Phoenicians, Jezebel, Ahab and Jezebel, same group of people. All right, so they were known for this. But anyway, there's still lots of things there that you can see. This dry, dusty, kind of half fallen apart modern city, and then you see these ancient ruins. And then also sorry for foreign students, there's an American cemetery there from World War II, our soldiers that died there in World War II. And it is green and lush and neatly trimmed and trees. It's like you're walking onto another planet when you walk in. It was really impressive. And you walk back out and you think of a dry, dusty Gary. That's kind of what it reminded me of. All right, and then you walk onto that American cemetery, and it's just immaculate. All right, Carthage. Any questions about the Punic Wars? Okay. Yes.
For the third Punic War, where did Carthage attack?
The place called Numidia, Numidia, Numidia.
How long did this war last?
146. It was 4 years from the time they attacked Numidia to the time Carthage was wiped out. All right, at the start of the Punic Wars, we mentioned some general things that happened there. One was that it's between Carthage and Rome. The other was that we see Rome going from a local power to a major Mediterranean power. Now you can see that. By this point, Carthage is gone. They're the uncontested masters, especially of the Western Mediterranean here. And it's not long at all till the whole entire Mediterranean is in their grasp. So, all right, the next thing is, for me, it's the third point, although really it's just a point. Without any subpoints. I know it's bad for the outline, but the next point for me is that by 100, Rome controlled all the borders of the Mediterranean. All the territory that bordered the Mediterranean was under Rome's control. After 100, they do conquer more places. The map on that map was 180, 220 years later. This would be 100 BC. By 100 BC, the entire Mediterranean was under their control. So that's 46 years after the end of the Punic Wars. They had gained control of the entire eastern Mediterranean. And we're not going to go into the different things that happened there, people dying and willing their kingdoms to Rome and different things, but they gained complete control of that. Okay, so by 100 we see Rome with that entire thing. Actually, they called the Mediterranean in Latin Mare Nostrum, which means our sea. You know, it's kind of like Lake Fairhaven. That was Lake Rome or something. It was their sea, right? Because they controlled the entire thing. All right, that brings us to the next main point then, is the civil wars of Rome. The civil wars of Rome. The civil wars start in 87 and go through 30. 87 to 30. Still BC. We are going to make the leap across into the ADs in a minute, but at this point, 87 to 30. We talked about that, the Roman Republic that started in 509 and how it lasts through 30. It's that 30, right? Once we get to the end of these civil wars, we have an emperor, a dictator that takes over. There's still the trappings, there's senators and other people like that, but they're like the Queen of England at that point. So this is very indicative of major turmoil within Rome. I mean, these are some ugly civil wars that take place here. So it gives us some indication of the decay on the inside that's taking place here. So, all right, we're not going to dive into great detail on the different civil wars, but just a little bit of what takes place in these. All right, the first one. This is called, they're just first, second, and third civil wars. You'd think historians could come up with something better than that, but first, second, third civil wars. The first civil war goes from 87 to 79. 87 to 79. And this is between a guy named Marius and Sulla. Marius and Sulla, S-U-L-L-A. Marius and Sulla. And this one, at least, is the way I've got to describe. There's no clear-cut winner. Initially, Sulla wins, and then Marius drives him out, and he takes over. Then Marius dies, and Sulla comes back and takes over. So it kind of goes back and forth. It's not like one guy won and the other guy gets hung in a tree outside of Rome. It goes back and forth between the two. So no clear-cut winner here. If you had to, at least Sulla was the last man standing because Marius died in office, so maybe you could, I don't know. 87 to 79. All right, the second civil war starts right on the tail end of that when Sulla dies, from 79 to 44. The second civil war. This one's much more famous. Second Punic War, second civil war. There's got to be some cosmic coincidence taking place there. So. All right, this is Pompey versus Caesar. As I heard, probably it's correct, Pompey, by a guy who has a doctorate in history, but that just sounds, I don't know, Pompey. Versus Caesar, 79 to 44. Caesar wins this, and he established himself as the leader of Rome. I mean, even the Caesar later, I mean, when the first emperor comes in and he's referring to himself as Caesar, he's hearkening back to Julius Caesar, and that's where the name comes from. But so he establishes himself as the leader, does all kinds of things, starts the Julian calendar and other stuff like that. Eventually, in 44, he's assassinated. March the 15th of 44, the Ides of March. Anybody know anything about that assassination? Something more than Caesar dies violently. Stabbed by a group of senatorial leaders, yeah. Or people sent by the senators. He sees his good friend Brutus amongst the assassins. Yeah, do you remember his phrase as he's getting stabbed? He says, "Et tu, Brute," and you, Brutus, basically. You know, it's saying Brutus had been his friend, and he's saying, "You're amongst those killing me." That phrase. So if you ever, just recently, I heard somebody say that in a political setting. They said "et tu," and then put on somebody that they thought had been their ally. All right, so "et tu, Brute." There's all kinds of neat things about Caesar. Prior to the Civil Wars, he conquered Gaul, and wrote stories about himself that get printed and distributed all through Italy, and he makes himself look good. Right? So he's this great conqueror in Gaul, and leading the armies of Rome, and the Senate starts to get a little worried about this, so they order him to come back. And Caesar knows if he goes back, somehow he's going to get killed. He doesn't know the pretext, but he knows he's going to get killed. So he brings his army back. And there's a phrase that is kind of antiquated. You might have heard of the phrase "crossing the Rubicon." All right, that was the border between Gaul and the main Italian provinces. And when he crossed that river, he was then in direct contradiction to the Senate orders. It's a phrase like "burning a bridge behind you," or that type of thing. So anyway, marches down through Rome. The Senate loses in that contest, and at least initially, and then Caesar loses. So political intrigue and assassination, it's very unhealthy for both parties, typically. So just, don't get involved. All right, the Third Civil War. Caesar gets killed. A group of people in the Senate are behind that. And then there's this vacuum of power again, and we see the Third Civil War. This is 44 to 30. 44 to 30. This is a guy named Octavian versus a guy named Antony. You have one of the great love tragedies in all of the world. And Allison, she hasn't shown any life yet, but when two people commit suicide together, it gets her attention. So Octavian wins, 31 BC. He wins a major battle, and up by Greece. He follows Octavian down to Egypt, and there Octavian and Cleopatra. Last class period you heard about the division, split up of Alexander the Great's empire into 4 different pieces. Cleopatra was the last ruler of one of those pieces. But anyway, Cleopatra and Antony commit suicide together. Very romantic. Guys, remember that if you're thinking about somebody to ask out. Very weird view of romance. Antony was the one who committed suicide. Octavian wins. Sorry. So anyway, as Octavian's sailing into the harbor, they drank some kind of poison, if I remember right. Oh, come on. So, all right, and then we got Octavian. He wins. So that is the end of the Third Civil War. There's not a fourth. So hopefully you're thinking, all right, this is different. The other times there's a civil war, somebody wins for a while and he dies, and it just, this process continues. It stops here. Octavian establishes himself, and we see the Civil War process stopping. He is the first emperor. We're going to get to that in a second. We're going to talk about the Roman Empire. He is the first emperor. We see a whole string of emperors ruling this thing, much like a dictatorship. I mean, they were completely in charge. Again, there was a Senate and the consuls and the tribunes and all that kind of stuff, but they were just trappings, just decorations. And he held the real power. Before we get to the Roman Empire and Octavian and a couple of the emperors today, I'd like to talk quickly about the decline of the Roman Republic. All right, we see this republic. We see it start in 509. It ends right here. What contributed to that? I've kind of already hinted at least the main underlying cause, but every good teacher needs to give you a list of things for some future date. All right, let me give you the first thing in my list is that many people began to depend on the government for handouts. These are intertwined, and I'm sure you could, slice them into different pieces. I'm not arguing that this is the only right way to split it up, but at least this gives us some way to kind of categorize some of the problems. So we have a massive welfare system, people living on government handout. We talked before about the Second Punic War. That kind of gets the pattern set, and we see that as they conquer and gain control of more areas, that same pattern going along. So begin to have large masses. And you can take that large masses probably in both ways, large numbers and then large people. They're on welfare. All right. But we have large groups of people moving into the cities and living on welfare, these free handouts. So let me give you the second point, and then we can kind of tie the two together. We also have the power of government being consolidated into just a few people's hands. Not quite an empire yet. But we see that power being consolidated. By that year 100, when we see all of the Mediterranean controlled by Rome, all of Italy was owned by about 2,000 people. I mean, the whole thing, 2,000 landowners. And we have that many, I would think, in Chesterton. All of Italy controlled by by 2,000 people. And those few people then were able to take the wealth that was coming into Rome and the wealth that they generated from their land and use it to buy off all of those lower classes that were unemployed, living in the cities, dependent upon the government. So they used this money to pay for these people's votes. They would have the giant circuses. The phrase bread and circuses comes from this. Give them bread, give them circuses, and then vote for me because I gave you the good entertainment. The same circuses later that we see them where they're killing animals, and then eventually Christians, that this is the root of them out of there. So we have the government controlled by just a few people. So tie that together with large numbers of people being unemployed, living in the cities, and these people more than willing to give them food and circuses and entertainment to buy their vote off. All right, a third reason why we see this Roman Republic collapse. We have the people on welfare, essentially, the power consolidated here in just a few people that were willing to buy votes from everybody. The third thing is the constant threat of attack and uprising in territories. Rome controlled a lot of area, and there was a constant need for armies in the field, and constant, someplace, some group of people trying to throw off Rome's rule. So there's this constant drain that direction. In one sense, you could just say that constant drain eventually drains them. It's one of those uprisings that eventually conquers Rome, but that's down the road. Okay, and then the last, number 4, and this one is tied in with the other ones. We see the character of the people disappearing and the family structure weakening. All of the things that our current welfare system does, it was doing here. All right, the individual character being destroyed, family structures being destroyed, personal initiative gone, self-respect gone, all of that. Okay, we don't have the end of Rome at this point, but we see this shift from a republic to an empire, from a republic of some form to a dictator here, essentially, that takes over. Okay, questions about those things? Again, you could slice them up differently, but at least that's the way I've got them sliced. Number 3 was the constant threat of uprising and attack on the frontiers. Okay, the last thing I want to do is just look at a few of the emperors, just kind of start into that. Next class we will run on with this and talk about the emperors and the persecution of Christians and other things that comes there. So for me, this is the next main point, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire. We had the Roman Republic that started in 509. That's now really a thing of the past. The Roman Empire. We already know the first emperor. Who's the first emperor? Octavian or Caesar Augustus. She went straight spiritual on us. All right, Caesar Augustus in the Bible, or Octavian, the guy who won the Third Civil War and hunted down Antony and Cleopatra. He is the emperor from 30 to 14. 30 BC, I should rephrase that, to 14 AD. 30 BC to 14 AD. So that constant swirl of civil war and short-term reigns and assassination, that ends here, and he reigns for 44 years. We have that stopping. All right, somebody tell me something of significance that happens inside of his reign. Julie already hinted at it for us. What did I say? Whatever, Allison. Christ was born. I told you I'd lose the freshman. Christ was born. Christ's birth here. When the Bible talks about Caesar Augustus declaring that all the world should be taxed and all of that, it was this guy, Octavian. It does give us a little bit of insight into why he wasn't just, we didn't have this long string of emperors, and one day one guy woke up and said, "Well, let's kind of see what we have." He was the first. I mean, he's organizing this, and I'm sure he's adjusting how things are ruled and taking a census to get population counts would fit with that type of restructuring. So, all right. So he's the emperor at the time of Christ's birth. His reign also starts the beginning of what's referred to as the Pax Romana. Pax Romana, which is Roman peace. If you were in good favor with the Roman government, this applied to you. If you somehow fell out of favor with the Roman government, then it wasn't so peaceful. But Pax Romana. This goes from 30 until 180, so a 210-year window, basically, of this Pax Romana. And it is in a lot of ways what it sounds like. It was a time where Rome was relatively peaceful inside the boundaries of the Roman Empire. They were still conquering and expanding new territories and things like that, but inside of Rome it was relatively peaceful, especially if you think back to the Civil Wars and before that the Punic Wars. There was nothing like that during this whole time frame. So this Roman peace for 210 years. And I do think it's not accidental that Christ comes at the beginning of that. Right? So the time of after Christ's death, when people are spreading all over the Roman Empire, it was a relatively safe time to do that type of travel. You didn't have to worry about, going back to Spain from Jerusalem and running into Octavian's army, navy going after Antony, or that type of thing wasn't happening. All right, so relatively safe within the Roman Empire. So Caesar or Octavian here starts this, and it goes all the way up through 180. All right, so Octavian, he's the first of the emperors. The next thing we like to look at here is a group of two emperors are called the Claudian emperors. Claudian, Claudian emperors. No, I'm sorry, I said two. There's more than two. Two of them we're going to mention. The first one is a guy named Tiberius. He's the second emperor. He takes over after Octavian. And he rules through 37. So he was the emperor during the time of Christ's earthly ministry and his crucifixion. Tiberius. And we've got to mention one other guy, a guy named Nero. What do you think of when you hear Nero?
Christian persecution.
Christian persecution. He was the first to persecute the Christians. You should also think insane. Okay. He was crazy, especially towards the end. His personal guard, I'm not sure how this works exactly, but he was forced to commit suicide by his personal guard. I'm not sure if it's still suicide at that point, but he did go completely crazy. But he did persecute the Christians. There's a fire that swept through Rome, and he blamed it on the Christians. He said, these stinking Christians, it was their fault. That's why the gods are mad at us. Let's get rid of the Christians. So, there's a funny story about his chicken. Anybody know that story? Nobody? Okay. He had a chicken named Roma. And he was playing some musical instrument, I think. And somebody came to him and said Rome was on fire, this fire that was going through Rome. And he got really upset and because he thought they said his chicken had died. When he heard it was just Rome burning, no big deal. But my chicken, that would have been horrible. So to cover up that, it was the Christians. It's hard to say, sorry people, I thought my chicken died, but it was just you. That looks really bad. So he blames it on the Christians, and we do have the first serious wave of persecution here under Nero. So, all right, questions on anything? Next time we'll pick it up there and look at the Flavian emperors and some others down through the years. So, you're dismissed.